Okay, the function h of x is said to be equal to 4 to the 1 over x squared. Okay, now what do we do to get this? Well, first thing we do in evaluating h of x is, well, what's the first thing we do to x? Well, it's pretty clear that x gets squared, so we square it. And then what do we do to that? Well, it's 1 over x squared, so we better take the reciprocal of what we got when we squared x. And then what do we do? Once we have that number, once we've squared x and taken the reciprocal, what do? We raise 4 to that power. Okay, so we've decomposed this function into a sequence of 3 operations. Squaring x, taking the reciprocal of that result, and then raising 4 to the power that we get when we did that. All right, well, now we're going to try to write this as a composite. And when we do, I noticed that at least one person kept looking back at this, okay? This, okay? We don't want to look back at that. That's going to confuse us. We've broken this down. We've expressed this, and if we've expressed it correctly, then we just have to look at this. Square x, take the reciprocal, raise 4 to that power. So I wrote a little note. Use this, don't look back. So we use, I got braces here. Use this. Forget this for the moment. We'll check it in a minute when we reconstruct the function, but we're just going to look at this. Okay, so we're going to say h of x. Now well, you've got 3 things that happen to x. So we're going to call those 3 things f, g, and k. And we're going to put them in this order. We're going to say h of x is f applied to g applied to k of x. F of g of k of x. It's a triple composite. And that's no more difficult once you know what the operations are than a composite of 2. It just takes a little more writing. Okay, well, what's the first thing that happens to x? It's k of x. What's the first thing that happens to x? Don't look at this. You can see, but don't bother. First thing that happens to x is you square it. So k of x is the first thing that happens, and squaring is the first thing that happens, so k of x had better be x squared, right? And then, what's the next thing? It's g. What's the next thing that happens? You take the reciprocal. Well, g has to be the reciprocal function. Whatever x is, you take its reciprocal, 1 over x. That's your g of x function. And then finally, you raise 4 to the power. To what power? Well, whatever power you got when you did this. So the f function has to be raised 4 to the power. So, and I wrote that as k, and I hope nobody copied it down that way. K f of x is then 4 to the x. We raise 4 to that power, okay? So this is your k function. This is your g function. This is your f function. So you apply f to the g, which is in turn applied to the k function. Now let's see how that works out. F of g of k of x, well, f is your 4 to the power, so that's 4 raised to the g of k of x. And now what's g of k of x? Well, g is your reciprocal, so it's going to be 4 raised to the 1 over k of x. G of k of x is 1 over k of x. Then, of course, k of x is x squared, so you end up with 4 to the 1 over x squared. Then you look back here and you say, hey, we got it. Okay, so that h of x equals f of g of k of x. Now, there's another way to do this, and I didn't think I had another board here, but I do. Yeah, and this reminds me we did some stuff here too, so let's go on. Okay, another way to look at it, 4 to the 1 over x squared is f of g of x. Okay, doing it a little differently, with g of x equal 1 over x squared. Now, of course, 1 over x squared is a composite of the x squared function and the reciprocal function, but 1 over x squared is also one of our basic functions. So we could just regard that as a single function, even though it's a composite. It's really something we can just regard in one chunk as the function 1 over x squared. And f of x then is still 4 to the x, so that f of g of x, I didn't write this out, but I will now, equals 4 to the g of x, and g of x is 1 over x squared, so it's 4 to the 1 over x squared. So this is a way of writing this out using a g of x function that, yes, is a composite, but since it's one of our basic functions, we're just going to go ahead and use it the way it is. Okay, now we moved on and talked about some transformations, so let's look at how that works.